The night my husband brought his pregnant mistress into our house, he set a voting proxy beside my dinner plate and gave me until midnight to sign away the company I had built. Blake did not look embarrassed. That was the first thing I noticed. He stood at the end of our dining table with one hand resting on the back of Vanessa Hale's chair and the other tapping his signet ring twice against the wood. He always did that before saying something he had rehearsed. Vanessa was 35, polished and 18 weeks pregnant. She wore cream cashmere and held a glass of water with both hands, as if she were the nervous guest and I were the one who had arrived without permission. The documents in front of me transferred my voting authority for 45 days. Another page authorized new financing against our marital assets. A third allowed the company to continue using my quality credentials while I took what Blake called a temporary leave. At the bottom of that page was the name Trace 8 Labs. My company, my system, my signature. Blake slid a pen toward me. "We have 37 days before the credit facility matures," he said. "Vanessa has a bridge financing solution, but she needs a clean chain of command." "Your chain of command," I said, "our family's future." Vanessa placed a hand over her stomach. Blake's mother sat to my left. His younger brother sat across from me. Neither looked surprised. Then Blake told me Vanessa would be staying in our home. Not at a hotel, not in the guest house, in our bedroom. My office would become the nursery. I looked down at the papers again. A water glass had left a pale ring over the page where Blake wanted my guarantee. It looked almost like a target. Lorraine Cole folded her hands on the table. "This is not the time for pride, Taryn." She had been my mother-in-law for 12 years and the company's human resources director for 8. She used the same voice when discussing layoffs, funerals, and seating arrangements at Thanksgiving. Soft enough to sound reasonable, flat enough to make resistance seem childish. "Vanessa's carrying Blake's child," she continued. "She is also bringing capital into this company. You need to separate your feelings from what is best for everyone." Mason leaned back in his chair. "You were good at counting boxes, Taryn." "Blake built the company." My hand tightened around the edge of the proxy. Counting boxes, that was what they thought medical logistics meant. They imagined shelves, clipboards, and neat columns of inventory. They did not imagine blood warming inside a damaged refrigerator during a sandstorm. They did not imagine a medic opening a sealed package and finding moisture where sterility should have been. They did not imagine that one wrong lot number could travel farther than a bullet. Blake tapped his ring twice again, signed by midnight. "We announce the restructuring tomorrow." I looked at him. "Which lot did you ship?" The room changed not much. "Just enough." Mason stopped rocking his chair. Vanessa's fingers tightened around her glass. Blake's eyes moved toward his brother before returning to me. "We are not discussing warehouse operations." That was not my question. Lorraine sighed as though I had proved her point. Then my phone vibrated inside my jacket. I pushed back from the table. The old damage I had carried home from the army caught hard in my left hip when I stood, a narrow line of pain that still arrived without warning. I let it settle before I crossed the room. I did not reach for it until I was alone in the kitchen. The message came from Lena, Mason's 19-year-old daughter. She had been working as an intern in packaging while taking classes at the community college. She had sent one photograph. A pallet wrapped in cloudy plastic sat beside a loading door. Most of the labels were too far away to read, but one carton had been turned on its side. Inside the bottom flap, barely visible through a split seam, was a small blue triangle. Lena's message contained 6 words. They made us relabel the hold cartons. I enlarged the image. The foil pouch visible through the damaged carton had a slight rise along one sealed edge. A swelling no wider than a fingernail. Most people would not have noticed it. I did because I had spent 15 years noticing small things before they became large ones. Behind me, laughter came from the dining room. Vanessa was telling the family where she wanted the crib. I opened the cabinet above the refrigerator and reached behind a stack of holiday plates. The evidence pouch was still there. The compression bandage inside had expired years earlier. Its foil wrapper was dull, its printed letters faded from black to gray. Along the upper seam, the material had separated after prolonged heat exposure. I had carried it home from my final deployment, not as a souvenir. As a warning, the day we found that pouch, the thermometer outside the supply shelter read 118 degrees. The shipment had arrived with perfect paperwork. Every carton was marked sterile. Every seal looked intact until pressure was applied near the edge. Then the layers separated. A medic had already opened another pouch from the same lot before we stopped distribution. He needed the bandage for a young specialist whose leg had been torn open below the knee. The medic improvised with what he had. The soldier survived the flight out. He died 2 days later. No report ever proved the pouch caused his infection. There were too many wounds, too much dirt, too many things that could go wrong. That uncertainty was worse than certainty. Certainty gives grief a shape. Uncertainty follows you into every warehouse for the rest of your life. I pressed my thumb against the old foil. It made a dry, delicate crackle. The pouch in Lena's photograph had the same rise along the seal. I did not know yet whether the product inside had failed. I knew someone had removed it from hold. That was enough to change the order of my problems. My husband's mistress could wait, the lot could not. To understand why I did not confront Blake that night, you need to understand the question beneath every decision he made. If he controlled the company, did he also control the truth? Blake liked to tell people he had created coal response systems after meeting a combat veteran who believed emergency medicine needed better supply chains. That version photographed well. In reality, I met Blake at a medical equipment conference 2 years before I left the army. He was selling disposable surgical products. I was the woman in uniform who kept asking where his company stored the temperature excursion records. He laughed the first time. He stopped laughing when I found a missing week. After I was medically retired, we built the business in a rented warehouse outside Huntsville. Blake handled sales. I handled everything that determined whether we deserved the sale. I designed the lot tracking structure. I built the acceptance standards. I wrote the heat exposure protocols and the recall map. When commercial software could not connect the packaging records, supplier certificates, shipping history, and final release data the way I needed, I created Trace8. The company owned the factory, I owned Trace8 Labs. Blake had insisted on the separation himself. At the time, he said it would protect the intellectual property if the operating company was ever sued. He had forgotten that protection works in both directions. The license allowed coal response systems to use Trace8 as long as the company followed its validation controls. It did not allow anyone to issue a certificate in my name after my authority had been withdrawn. On opening day, a local photographer took a picture of Blake cutting a red ribbon in front of the building. I was visible in the lower corner, on my knees, repairing a scanner that had dropped 6 digits from a supplier lot code. Blake framed the photograph and hung it in reception. He thought it showed the day he became a founder. I thought it showed the day I should have understood what role he had assigned me. By the time Vanessa entered our marriage, the company looked successful from the outside. We had 86 employees, a clean glass lobby, a factory line painted white and blue, and a pending federal contract worth $28 million. What we did not have was cash. The factory expansion had cost more than Blake admitted. A hospital chain had delayed payment. 2 customers had returned inventory after a labeling dispute. In less than 5 weeks, the company owed $4,800,000 it did not have. Vanessa arrived as a restructuring consultant. She wore silver heels on the factory floor and wrote notes with a silver mechanical pencil. During her first presentation, she drew a line through the quality reserve and called it trapped capital. Blake called her fearless. I called the reserve money we might need if something failed. 9 months later, she was pregnant, living in my house, and offering a bridge loan through Halden Recovery Fund. The loan sounded like rescue when Blake explained it. The fund would advance enough money to survive until the federal contract began paying. Vanessa would become chief operating officer. Blake would keep control. The employees would keep their jobs. All I had to do was step aside and let them continue using the systems I had built. Mason preferred voice messages to email because he believed spoken instructions disappeared. Lorraine kept a spare access card inside her phone case because she forgot her regular badge twice a week. Vanessa marked every loan document with that silver pencil. Blake tapped his ring before every lie he had prepared. They all had habits. In the army, habits kept people alive. In business, habits left trails. At 11:40 that night, Blake knocked once on the bedroom door and asked whether I had signed. "I am reviewing it," I said. He mistook that for hesitation. It was not. I had decided to give him exactly 1 night to believe he had won. At 6 the next morning, I put the old compression bandage into my bag, drove toward the factory, and rehearsed the one question that mattered. Had they only changed the label, or had someone moved my signature too? My badge failed before the air shower finished its first descending chime. The reader flashed red. I tried again. Red. Through the glass I could see the assembly floor waking up. Operators in blue coats moved between stainless steel tables. A forklift backed toward receiving, its alarm sounding every 4 seconds. Above the packaging line, every stack light was green. The factory looked healthy. That was the danger. A security guard named Paul stepped out of the booth. "Mrs. Cole, Human Resources marked you on personal leave." I did not request personal leave. I can call Mrs. Cole. There were 2 Mrs. Coles in the building, and he did not mean me. "No," I said, "do not call anyone." I had trained people never to improvise around access controls. Asking Paul to let me through because I owned part of the company would have made me the first person to violate the rules I had written. So I walked around to the loading side, where Trace 8 Labs had a separate entrance and lease. The small room behind that door smelled of solder, disinfectant, and old coffee. Servers sat inside a locked cage against the back wall. A blue status light blinked above the audit mirror. Blake could remove me from the operating company. He could not remove Trace 8 from itself. I logged in under the owner account and filtered the certificate history by my signing credential. One release certificate had been created at 9:16 the previous morning. Human Resources had disabled my company access at 8:33. 43 minutes. That was the distance between removing me from the system and using my name inside it. The certificate covered Lot 7C 1200 compression bandages. My signature block appeared at the bottom, not a scan. Not an image pasted into a document, a valid digital certificate created with my credential. The event history showed my account restored for 6 minutes, the certificate generated, then the account disabled again. Someone had not copied my signature, someone had moved it. I created a read-only forensic image through Trace 8's disaster recovery function. The copy locked its timestamp and generated a hash value that would expose later changes. Only after it completed did I notice a second certificate. Different lot, same credential, scheduled for release that afternoon. My phone rang. Blake. I let it stop and called Mara Jennings. Mara had handled Army procurement disputes for 11 years before moving into private practice. She wore dark suits, spoke in complete sentences, and never said something was fine when she meant survivable. She met me 40 minutes later in a windowless conference room. I placed the old compression bandage on the table, then the certificate timeline beside it. Mara read in silence. When she reached the second certificate, she removed her glasses. "Before we discuss Blake," she said, "we discuss you. I did not issue those certificates, I believe you. A system log may prove it, but you signed the quarterly quality attestation in March. Based on the report they gave me, you signed it. The report covered supplier controls, hold procedures, and certificate access. I had reviewed the summaries while recovering from another hip surgery. Blake said the source files were clean. Mason said the only open issue was a label dispute. I signed because I was tired. I signed because I trusted that I could correct anything later." Mara pushed the timeline back toward me. "If this becomes a federal contract matter, no one begins by asking whether your husband betrayed you. They ask what you knew when you knew it and what you did next." "What do I do next? The safest disclosure is the one made before the government discovers you knew." She told me not to enter the operating company without authorization, copy employee mailboxes, contact customers, or confront anyone before preserving what we legally controlled. Trace 8 could protect its records, everything else required process. Mara drafted a legal hold, a formal withdrawal of my quality authorization, and a voluntary disclosure identifying the 2 certificate events. She did not send them yet. First we identify the physical lot. I showed her Lena's photograph. "Did you ask her to take this?" "No." "Did you ask her to remove anything?" "No." "Keep it that way." I met Lena behind the factory during her lunch break. She parked beside the retention pond far from the employee entrance. Her hands shook so badly she dropped her keys between the seats. "I am sorry," she said. "I should have told you sooner." "Tell me what you saw, nothing you heard from someone else." 3 days earlier, Quality had placed red hold labels on 18 cartons from Lot 7C. Lena had drawn a small blue triangle inside each bottom flap because the hold stickers kept peeling from the cold cartons. It was not an official procedure, it was a habit from her electronics lab at school. She marked the inside so she would know if someone replaced the outside label. The next morning, the red labels were gone. Mason told the packaging team the hold had been cleared verbally. "Who printed the new labels? He made me do it. Did you see a release certificate?" He had one on his phone. Whose name? Her eyes filled. "Yours." I looked across the pond at the company logo stretched across the concrete. "My last name, his decision. Where are the cartons now?" "I do not know. They moved them before first shift. I told her not to log into anything, search for the shipment, or discuss our meeting with her father." She twisted her intern badge around her fingers. "My dad said it was only paperwork." That is what people call a safety control after they decide they do not want it. Back at Mara's office, we sent a board request for the disposition of Lot 7C, the authority used to clear the hold, and the access history tied to both certificates. Blake answered in 11 minutes. He accused me of sabotaging the company because I was jealous of Vanessa and unable to accept the end of our marriage. He said my access had been restricted to protect employees and customers. He threatened damages if I interfered with the federal launch. While I read the accusation, the audit mirror refreshed. The second certificate changed status, released. A shipping record appeared beneath it. Lot 7C had departed at 10:28 that morning for a military training supply center in Georgia. Then I saw the timestamp. The certificate had been generated after my written withdrawal reached the company server. Blake had received notice. He had called my objection sabotage. Then someone used my credential again. Mara read the record over my shoulder. "This is where your options become obligations." I looked at the old pouch inside its evidence bag. Years earlier, I had stood in a supply shelter and wondered whether I stopped a damaged lot soon enough. I would not ask that question twice. Send it. Mara transmitted the voluntary disclosure to the Government Quality Assurance Office and the contracting channel assigned to the pending award. We attached the certificate identifiers, withdrawal notice, sealed audit image, and a request for a quiet inventory hold. We did not accuse Blake of fraud, we stated what could be proven. My credential had been used after withdrawal, a previously held lot had been released. The product required independent testing before further distribution. Trace 8 maintained sealed retention samples from every production lot. Under the lab agreement, I could preserve and test them when validation integrity was disputed. A bonded courier arrived before sunset. Dr. Priya Nand joined by video while I placed the sample into a tamper-evident container. "Do not squeeze the pouch," she said. "We need its condition before anyone adds pressure." I signed across the tape where it crossed the box seam. The courier signed beneath me. Mara signed as witness. 3 signatures, none hidden. The government reviewer told me not to contact the training center. They would isolate the shipment without identifying the source until the first inspection was complete. That meant I had to go home and sit across from Blake while he believed he still controlled the clock. When I pulled into the driveway, the lights in my old office were on. Through the window, Vanessa held a paint card against the wall with one hand and rested the other over her stomach. Blake stood behind her. He kissed the side of her head, then saw me watching. He smiled. He believed the company was moving forward. 3 hours earlier, I had placed its most profitable product line inside a sealed question. All that remained was to learn whether the answer would cost him a contract. Or everything. The first thing Vanessa removed from my office was the deployment map. She had not thrown it away. That would have been easier. She had laid it flat across the desk and placed 3 paint samples over northern Iraq. Pale blue, soft gray, something called morning cloud. A framed ultrasound photograph covered the corner where I had once marked the supply route to a field hospital. The room smelled of fresh paint and the vanilla candle Vanessa had already placed on my bookshelf. My books were packed into 2 cartons near the door. Blake entered behind me. "Vanessa needs a calm space." "She has one. This room gets better light." He spoke as if we were discussing furniture, not the systematic replacement of my life. On the floor beside the desk sat the evidence pouch containing the old compression bandage. Vanessa must have moved it while clearing the shelves. She had rested a box of nursery hardware on top of it. I lifted the box away and placed the pouch in my bag. Blake watched. "You always keep the strangest things." Some things are easier to recognize the second time. His phone lit up. He turned it face down before I could see the screen. Family meeting tomorrow night, he said. We vote on the financing and the management transition. You already removed me. You are still a shareholder. For now, his jaw tightened. You are making this harder than it needs to be. That sentence had carried most of our marriage. Whenever Blake crossed a line, the problem became the distance I placed between us afterward. I looked at the ultrasound photograph again. The child had done nothing to me. That mattered. Vanessa's pregnancy did not make her honest. It did not make Blake less responsible. But I would not turn an unborn child into evidence or punishment simply because the adults around it had confused cruelty with planning. I will attend the meeting, I said. Blake nodded, relieved. He thought I was still negotiating for a place in the house. I had already decided there was no place left worth keeping. The next evening, Lorraine set the dining table as though the family were celebrating something. She served roast chicken, buttered carrots, and the expensive wine Mason brought when he wanted everyone to believe a decision had already been made. Vanessa sat in my chair, a stack of documents rested beside her plate. Blake began with the employees, 86 people, he reminded me. 86 mortgages, 86 families. Then Lorraine spoke about the lake property she and her husband had pledged as collateral during the factory expansion. Mason spoke about Lena's tuition. Vanessa said nothing at first. She kept one hand near her silver mechanical pencil and waited until everyone else had built the wall around me. Then she pushed the term sheet forward. The fund needs temporary voting certainty, she said. 45 days after the federal award closes, we can normalize the structure. Normalize, I repeated. It means no permanent change is necessary. The proxy gave Blake authority to vote my shares on financing, executive appointments, and operating decisions. It also included a sentence allowing him to approve any related transaction he considered necessary to preserve company value. That sentence was broad enough to swallow the rest of the document. I took my pen and crossed it out. Vanessa's expression did not change, but the pencil stopped moving between her fingers. I added a restriction: no new debt guaranteed by my personal assets. No transfer of trace aid intellectual property, no authority to use my quality credential. The proxy would expire after 45 days whether financing closed or not. Blake stared at the changes. You cannot expect us to save the company with both hands tied. You are not getting both hands. Mason dropped his fork. There it is. She wants the company to fail so she can blame Blake. Lorraine leaned toward me. You have sacrificed for this family before. Why stop now? Because sacrifice had become their word for anything they wanted me to lose. I did not say it. Instead, I signed the restricted proxy. Blake picked it up as though the page itself proved he had won. Vanessa signed as witness. Lorraine smiled. For the next 45 days, Blake could outvote me. He could remove me from office. He could invite Vanessa into every meeting I had once led. What he could not do was make my withdrawal disappear. He could control the company. He could not lawfully move my signature. Vanessa revised the bridge financing documents the following morning. As a shareholder, I received the updated term sheet through the company portal. The fund would advance enough to cover payroll, critical suppliers, and the bank maturity. In return, it received a senior claim against the factory, inventory, receivables, and equipment. If the federal contract was delayed, suspended, or lost, Halden Recovery Fund could force a sale process. If no qualified buyer appeared within 60 days, the fund received the right to acquire selected assets at a value determined by an independent appraiser it helped choose. A rescue loan should have bought time. This one bought position. Vanessa had built a structure in which she won two ways. If the contract closed, she became chief operating officer of a company with fresh money. If it failed, her fund moved to the front of the line to purchase what remained. A note appeared in the margin beside the certificate condition, written in silver pencil before the document had been scanned. Keep Taryn's certificate live through funding. The pencil point had snapped on the word default, leaving a dark fleck embedded in the paper. I sent the term sheet to Mara. Her reply arrived 5 minutes later. Do not confront her. Preserve the document. At 2:14 that afternoon, Doctor. Priya Nand called. Mara joined the line. Priya did not begin with a conclusion. She described the test. The retention sample had been photographed, measured, and placed inside a controlled heat chamber. The temperature rose according to the same limits used in our transport validation. At the first interval, the pouch remained intact. At the second, a faint channel appeared along the upper seam. At the third, pressure escaped through the laminate. The pouch did not fail in our chamber, Priya said. The seal had already begun failing before we put it there. I looked at the old bandage on my desk, same material rise. Same quiet separation. Can you confirm loss of sterility? I asked. Not from the pouch alone. We can confirm the package no longer meets the seal integrity requirement. That distinction mattered. It was not proof someone had been harmed. It was proof the product should never have been released. Mara asked when the formal report would be ready. Tomorrow morning. After the call, I sat without moving. I had wanted the problem to be paperwork. A false certificate could be traced, corrected, and prosecuted. A physical failure meant someone had placed a product they could not trust into a chain designed for people who would not have time to question it. The government reviewer located the shipment before sunset. 600 units had reached a training supply center in Georgia. Another 600 had been sent to a medical readiness facility in Tennessee. Neither location had distributed the bandages yet. The cartons were isolated quietly. No recall notice had been issued. No one wanted Blake warned before the access history was secured. Then Marcus Bell sent a second message. Cole Response Systems had scheduled the same product for a live demonstration at the Freedom Line launch in 2 days. Blake planned to place one of the questionable pouches into the hands of a medic on stage and call it proof that the company understood battlefield needs. The image made something inside me go still. He was not only shipping the lot. He was preparing to use trust as theater. The next morning, Lena asked to meet again. She arrived without her intern badge. The lanyard was wrapped around her fist. My dad knows somebody talked, she said. Did he threaten you? No. He told everyone the hold was a mistake and Aunt Taryn was trying to destroy the company because Uncle Blake left her. She swallowed hard. I saved something. Mason hated typing. He believed voice messages left no paper trail. 2 nights earlier, he had sent Lena a recording after she asked whether to destroy the old hold labels. His voice came through her phone speaker. Blake said, "Clear the cartons. Print the clean labels. Keep Taryn's name on the certificate until the money lands. Do not make this bigger than it is." Lena stopped the recording before the final second. The parking lot seemed unnaturally quiet. Did you alter this file? No. Did you send it to anyone? No, do not send it to me directly. Her face changed. She thought I did not believe her. I explained that Mara needed to preserve the original file from her device, document when it was created, and protect her from any claim that she had edited it. Lena looked toward the factory. I packed some of those cartons. You marked them on hold. I still packed them. You followed the process until someone with more authority ordered you to break it. That does not make it okay. No, I said, it makes telling the truth next matter. Mara collected the phone image and arranged for an independent copy. The recording changed the shape of the case. Until then, Blake could claim a system error, an overzealous sales decision, or a misunderstanding about my authority. The voice message connected the relabeling to the financing deadline and the deliberate use of my name. It also told Blake that someone inside the factory had stopped being afraid of him. His answer came before lunch. An emergency board meeting was scheduled for 4 that afternoon. The agenda had one item: removal of Taryn Cole as Chief Quality Officer for cause. I read the notice twice, then I placed my company badge beside the old compression bandage. Blake believed he was about to separate me from the last part of the company I controlled. He did not understand that each time he pushed me farther outside, the distance between my decisions and his excuses became easier to prove. My name disappeared from the organization chart before the board meeting officially began. The screen at the front of the conference room showed Blake at the top, Vanessa beneath him as Chief Operating Officer, and Mason leading sales. The quality division had been moved under operations. My position was gone. Blake had not waited for the vote. Lorraine sat beside him with a printed packet aligned perfectly against the edge of the table. Mason would not look at me. Vanessa wore navy instead of cream, as if changing clothes could turn an affair into a corporate appointment. Blake tapped his ring twice. This meeting concerns repeated actions by Taryn that have endangered financing, customer relationships, and employee stability. He called my disclosure an unauthorized attack on company operations. He described the certificate dispute as a technical misunderstanding. He said my emotional response to our separation had made me incapable of distinguishing personal pain from fiduciary responsibility. I let him finish, then Mara, seated beside me, asked that the minutes record 3 facts. My signing authority had been withdrawn in writing. I had objected to further use of my credential. I had requested information concerning a held lot before making any outside disclosure. Blake's face tightened. This is exactly what I mean. She is building a case instead of helping the company. Mara did not raise her voice. She is making a record. The restricted proxy gave Blake enough votes to remove me as chief quality officer. Lorraine voted with him. Mason voted with him. Vanessa did not have a vote yet, but she sat close enough to Blake that no one mistook her position. The motion passed. Blake looked relieved for less than a second. Then I asked for the effective time to be entered into the minutes. 4:23 in the afternoon. I asked that the company confirm it would not use my name, credential, or authority after that time. Blake leaned back. You do not get to hold 86 jobs hostage because you are angry. The minutes, I said. Lorraine finally looked at me. You are enjoying this? No, that was the truth. Enjoyment would have been easier than what I felt. The company had my systems inside it the way a body has bone. I could not remove them without hearing something break. But Blake had already decided the sound would be my fault. The formal separation agreement arrived the next morning. Blake kept the operating company, the factory lease, the brand, and temporary voting control. I retained my existing shares, though new financing could dilute them until they were worth almost nothing. I also retained Trace 8 Labs. Blake's attorney described it as a small technical subsidiary with limited standalone value. They offered to release me from any new personal guarantee if I signed quickly and agreed not to interfere with operations. Mara read the document twice. They think the lab is a storage room. It has always looked like one. Do they understand the license conditions? They understand whatever Vanessa told them. Mara looked at me over the top of the pages. Once you sign, you may lose most of the value you built. I know. You may also lose the ability to influence how the company treats employees. I know, and your existing shares may become worthless. I know. She waited. I looked through the conference room window at the loading yard. A truck was backing toward the dock, its alarm repeating every 4 seconds. For years, every bad decision Blake made eventually arrived at my desk disguised as an emergency. If I remained inside the company, he would keep using my presence as proof that the process was still controlled. I want the guarantee release, I said. I want the Trace 8 records preserved. And I want language stating that any future use of my credential requires written authorization. Mara added all 3. Blake signed without negotiating. He believed he was giving me a room full of servers and taking the business. He slid the lab keys across the table. Consider it part of your retirement. I picked them up. The keys were lighter than the wedding ring still on my hand. That evening, 2 cardboard boxes waited beside the garage door at home. My uniforms had been folded inside the first one. My books and framed certificates filled the second. The dress uniform I had worn at my retirement ceremony lay beneath a package of crib sheets. Vanessa had already moved her clothes into the main bedroom. Blake stood in the hallway while I carried the boxes outside. You made your choice, he said. I did. You get the lab, your army things, and whatever personal property your lawyer lists. The rest stays until we settle the divorce. Behind him, the nursery door was open. The deployment map had been removed entirely. In its place hung wooden letters spelling a name I did not recognize. Blake followed my eyes. We are calling him Caleb. I nodded. The child's name was not part of my war. Blake seemed unsettled by the absence of a reaction. You could have stayed involved, he said. You could still help us through the launch. You removed me for cause. You know what I mean. I did. He wanted me gone from the photographs and present in every emergency. I carried the boxes to my truck. Before closing the tailgate, I removed the evidence pouch containing the old compression bandage and placed it on the passenger seat. I left the wedding photographs inside the house. The next morning, Mara and I met Marcus Bell in a borrowed conference room near the industrial park. Marcus had been an army medic before becoming a government quality assurance specialist. He did not salute me, thank me for serving, or ask about my marriage. He opened with the certificate timeline. The inventory hold will be delivered at the launch tomorrow, he said. Why there? Your company scheduled a live product demonstration and additional shipments immediately afterward. The affected inventory will be in active movement. We stop it before that happens. Dr. Priya Nand would attend remotely until the sample report required explanation. The bank's restructuring officer had also accepted Blake's invitation to the launch. So had representatives from the hospital chain, suppliers, and the proposed lender. Blake had gathered everyone he needed to impress into one building. The disclosure had gathered everyone who needed accurate information into the same place. I asked Marcus whether the hold could be issued without disrupting payroll. That is not my authority. Can the employees be told the product issue is under review, not that they are accused of misconduct? If that remains accurate, Mara placed the March quarterly attestation on the table. Marcus looked at me. This review includes your signature too. I understand. A signature means responsibility only while the signer still controls the process, he said. Before that point, we determine what you should have known. After that point, we determine who acted in your name. There was no promise inside the sentence, only a line. For the first time in years, the line was visible. The Freedom Line launch began the following afternoon. Blake had transformed the assembly floor into a showroom. Blue banners hung between the workstations. A small stage stood beside the packaging line. Cameras faced a display of trauma kits arranged beneath the company logo. Employees had been told the event would secure the federal contract and protect their jobs. That was why they applauded so hard when Blake stepped onto the stage. Vanessa stood beside him in a fitted blue dress, one hand resting beneath her stomach. Lorraine sat in the front row. Mason moved through the crowd, shaking hands too quickly. I entered through the Trace 8 door carrying one box of personal equipment and my company badge. The box pulled against the scar tissue in my left hip. I shifted the weight once, waited for the ache to ease, and kept walking. No one had invited me onto the stage. That was exactly where I wanted to be. Blake began with the company's history. He spoke about sacrifice, innovation, and the courage to make difficult decisions. Then he thanked Vanessa. He called her the woman who had brought discipline, capital, and a new generation into co-response systems. The applause grew louder. A photograph appeared on the screen behind him. It showed Blake cutting the ribbon on opening day. The lower corner had been cropped. The place where I had been kneeling beneath the scanner was gone. Blake announced Vanessa as Chief Operating Officer. He announced that the federal award was entering its final stage. He announced that I had chosen to step away because I no longer shared the company's vision for growth. Every stack light above the line remained green. He smiled toward the cameras and placed his hand over Vanessa's. For one complete moment, Blake had everything he believed he wanted. The factory, the stage, the woman, the child, the contract. And a version of the company's history in which I had never been necessary. At the rear control station, Marcus Bell entered his credentials. One green light flickered, then another. Blake lifted a sealed trauma kit from the display table. He turned toward the medic waiting beside him for the live demonstration. Behind the stage, the first stack light changed from green to red. The first red light was followed by 6 more, then the conveyor stopped. The motor beneath the packaging line wound down, the label printer cut off in the middle of a batch. A forklift operator lifted his foot from the pedal and looked toward the control station. For the first time since I entered the building, I could hear the ventilation system. Blake still held the trauma kit above the display table. Reset the line. Marcus stepped away from the control station. No one resets anything. The medic waiting for the demonstration placed both hands behind his back and moved away. Lot 7C and all related inventory are under administrative hold, Marcus said. Loading doors remain closed. No product leaves this facility. Blake lowered the kit. This is a routine inspection issue. We deal with these all the time. Marcus looked toward the local news crew. This is not a media event anymore. Security asked the cameras to shut down. Employees stood between the workstations, waiting for someone to tell them whether they still had jobs. You could have handled this privately, Blake said. We did until you scheduled a live demonstration and additional shipment of held inventory. Vanessa closed the folder she carried. She had stopped touching him. A monitor above the stage changed from the company logo to a laboratory image. Dr. Priya Nand appeared beside an enlarged photograph of a foil pouch. A narrow channel ran through the laminate. Priya explained that the pouch entered the chamber with separation already present. Under conditions within the company's approved transport range, the seal opened further. The package no longer met the requirement for a sterile barrier. That is one sample, Blake said. It is the sealed retention sample for the lot you released. Mason stepped forward. No one proved the product was contaminated. The package is the sterile barrier, Priya said. If you cannot prove the barrier remains intact, you cannot certify the product as sterile. Marcus looked at me. Trace 8 initiated this disclosure, he said. Mrs. Colt, present your record. I carried my box to the stage. The old compression bandage rested on top. Beneath it was a 3-inch black evidence binder and an encrypted drive. The index ran 183 pages, Trace 8 logs I had sealed alone. Priya's laboratory report, the audio Mara had preserved. Card entries, shipment scans, emails, sample photographs, and the financing pages that tied them together. I set the binder beside the trauma kit. Its metal rings struck the display table with one flat knock. Blake stared at it. You brought a file to my launch? I brought your timeline. I connected the drive. The product failure had stopped the line. The certificate history broke what remained of Blake's story. A timeline appeared on the monitor. At 8:33, Lorraine's human resources account marked me on personal leave and disabled my access. At 9:12, her spare keycard entered the restricted administration room. At 9:14, my signing credential was restored. At 9:16, the certificate for Lot 7C was created. At 9:19, the credential was disabled again. I pointed to the first entry, 8:33. You disabled me, I moved to the certificate, 9:16. You used me, then the final event, 9:19. You hid it. Lorraine touched the phone case where she kept the card. I only opened the room. Blake said the system had locked out an approved release. Marcus lifted a carton from the display pallet. The replacement label on the outside was clean. Lena moved from the employee section before anyone called her name. Her father saw her and went still. She opened the bottom flap. A small blue triangle appeared inside. She opened a second carton. Another triangle. I marked every carton quality placed on hold, she said. The outside labels were replaced. Lena, step away from that, Mason said. She removed her intern badge and placed it on the table. No, it was the first time I heard her say the word without apologizing first. Marcus ordered the markings photographed and the cartons sealed. I looked at Blake. You replaced the labels. You missed the flaps. I opened the second timeline. My written withdrawal reached the company server before the next certificate was issued. After withdrawal, after notice, after you knew, then I selected the preserved audio file. Mason's voice filled the silent factory. Blake said, clear the cartons. Print the clean labels. Keep Taryn's name on the certificate until the money lands. Do not make this bigger than it is. Mason looked at Blake. You told me it was legal. I told you the hold was excessive. I opened the security recording. It showed Blake entering the administration room with Lorraine's card. He stood beside a technician while the credential was restored. Before giving the final instruction, he tapped his signet ring twice against the desk. The same habit, the same prepared lie. Blake turned toward me. She arranged this because I left her. She's been sabotaging the contract from the moment Vanessa moved into our house. I opened the email Mara had preserved after my board request and placed it on the monitor beside the second certificate. In it, Blake acknowledged that I disputed his authority to use my credential. The second certificate was issued afterward. His own accusation proved he knew there was no consent. Blake looked directly at me. I gave him the only sentence I had brought for that moment. You fired the signature, Blake. The standard stayed. He opened his mouth, but the bank officer stood first. Owen Mercer placed Vanessa's bridge loan term sheet beside the held trauma kit. The government contract is delayed, Blake said. That is why we have the bridge facility. Owen looked at Vanessa. Has Halden authorized funding despite the hold? The documents allow for operational disruption, she said. They allow the fund to decline funding if the federal award is suspended. Owen opened the default section. This loan does not rescue coal response systems. It puts Halden first in line to own what remains after default. He pointed to the purchase option covering the factory equipment, inventory, receivables, and selected intellectual property. If the contract fails, Halden controls the sale timeline before the first dollar arrives. I removed the scanned page containing Vanessa's silver note from the evidence binder and placed it beside Owen's hand. Keep Taryn's certificate live through funding. The broken pencil mark rested beside the word default. Vanessa looked at Blake. I told you the certificate had to remain valid. You told me the loan was committed. I told you what conditions had to be met. She closed the folder and moved 2 steps away from him. The financial consequences did not arrive as one explosion. They came as separate vibrations from Blake's phone. The pending federal award went on hold. The bank suspended further availability under the revolving line. The insurer demanded a full incident report. The hospital chain froze its purchase discussions. 2 suppliers changed the company to cash before delivery. Both training centers confirmed all 1,200 units were isolated. Then Owen received the bank credit committee's decision. Because the federal award could no longer support the borrowing calculation, available company cash would be applied to the matured obligation at the next processing window. Payroll money, supplier money, everything Blake had already spent in his head. Lorraine rose so quickly her chair struck the concrete. What happens to the lake property? Owen did not soften his answer. If the company cannot cure the default, every pledged asset is reviewed. Mason reached for Lena's arm. She stepped behind Marcus before he touched her. Vanessa watched that movement, then glanced toward the nearest exit. The future she described at our dining table had never included standing beside Blake after the assets lost their value. On the stage, the sealed trauma kit remained beneath the lights. The company logo was still printed across it in blue. A label can stay perfect after the process behind it has failed. Blake looked at me. You took everything. I did not answer. Marcus ordered the demonstration inventory sealed. Priya's report remained on the monitor. Lena stood beside the cartons her father had ordered her to relabel. Around us, 86 employees watched the company's value drain away without a single dollar passing through my hands. Blake wanted a business without my authority. By the time the last call ended, that was exactly what he owned. The first people asked to leave were not the executives. They were the workers standing beside open product, unfinished labels, and sealed cartons. Marcus divided the assembly floor into controlled zones. Employees removed gloves, documented what they had touched, and waited in the cafeteria while the affected inventory was counted. Some cried, some stared at me. One man from second shift asked whether I was proud of myself. I told him no, he had worked at Coal Response Systems for 6 years. His wife was due to start chemotherapy the following month. The company carried their insurance. He did not care who had forged my credential. He cared whether his paycheck would clear on Friday. That was the part revenge stories usually skipped. Buildings did not fall on the people who designed the damage first. They fell on whoever happened to be standing underneath. The bank appointed a restructuring officer before the end of the week. He asked Traceate to support the recall because no one else could reconstruct every supplier record, carton history, and shipment path quickly enough. I agreed under written conditions. Blake would have no access to the system. Every action would be logged, the recall budget and the next payroll would be funded before professional fees. Lena would be treated as a cooperating witness, not as the person responsible for the relabeling order. Mara warned me that I had no authority to demand all of it. I am not demanding, I said, I am setting the terms for my license. That authority I still had. For 4 days I worked in the lab I had supposedly received as a consolation prize. We traced all 1,200 bandages, none had been used. 2 other production lots shared the same supplier laminate, but had not yet shown failure. They were quarantined until testing was complete. Lena sat beside me, comparing carton records against shipping scans. Her father had stopped calling. At one point she placed her intern badge beside the old compression bandage. I do not think I can work in medical products anymore. You do not have to decide while you are still afraid. What if I miss something again? You will, she looked at me. Everyone misses something, I said. The question is what kind of person you become when the evidence tells you that you did. On the 5th day, Blake came to the lab. He looked smaller without the stage behind him. The signet ring was gone from his hand. He stood outside the glass until I opened the door. 30 days, he said, that is all I need. For what? Restore the license, come back as quality officer. We complete the recall, satisfy the bank, and keep the federal contract alive. The contract is suspended. Suspended is not dead. He stepped closer. Vanessa is gone. Halden fired her. The board will remove Mason and my mother if that is what you want. It is not. We have 86 employees. You remembered them late. His face tightened. My child is coming. Your child needs a father who can still distinguish responsibility from leverage. He lowered his voice. If you do not help me, my mother loses the lake property. People lose their jobs, the company disappears. Is that really what you want? For years, that question had worked. Blake would place other people between us and ask how much damage I was willing to cause by refusing him. This time I could see the shape of it. I will support the recall, I said. I will help move qualified employees to other manufacturers. I will provide records to the receiver and the license. No, Taryn. You are asking me to make the company look controlled while you remain in control. I can change, then change without using my name to finance it. He looked through the glass at Lena. You turned my family against me. No, they finally had to hear themselves clearly. Blake left without asking me to save him again. The investigations lasted months. My voluntary disclosure did not erase the quarterly attestation I had signed. Reviewers asked why I had accepted summarized data, why I had not audited certificate access earlier, and whether loyalty to Blake had influenced my judgment. The honest answer was yes. I had confused being indispensable with being loved. Maybe you know that role. You are the person everyone calls after the warning was ignored, after the money was spent, after the promise was made without your consent. They praise you for being calm, capable, and reliable. What they mean is that your competence lets them postpone responsibility. They do not ask whether carrying the crisis is costing you sleep, health, or the right to say no. They only notice your strength when you stop lending it to them. For a long time, I thought silence was proof of discipline. Sometimes it is. Silence can give you time to preserve a record, protect an innocent person, or keep anger from destroying the evidence you still need. But silence stops being strategy when everyone else begins treating it as permission. A boundary that exists only in your mind is not a boundary they can be held to. The first step does not have to be dramatic. You do not need a stage, a perfect speech, or the courage to solve your whole life in one night. Write down what happened while you still remember the time. Save the message, ask for the decision in writing. Separate what you know from what you fear. Tell one person who has no reason to benefit from your silence. And when someone uses your name, your work, or your loyalty to make a promise you did not authorize, withdraw it clearly. That is not cruelty, it is not abandonment, it is the moment responsibility returns to the person who created the risk. People who depend on your rescue may call your boundary selfish. They may place employees, children, parents, debt, illness, or family history between you and the word no. Listen carefully to what they are asking. Are they asking you to help repair harm, or to make the harm look controlled while they keep causing it? You are allowed to help the innocent without restoring power to the guilty. You are allowed to protect the workers and refuse the executive. You are allowed to care about a child without surrendering to the adults who use that child as leverage. You are allowed to correct what is yours and leave what was never yours to carry. I had believed that if I corrected every failure quietly enough, no one would have to admit who created it. The review found no evidence that I knew about the relabeling or false certificates before my authority was withdrawn. But it criticized my earlier oversight and required corrective training before I could support future regulated contracts. My shares in coal response systems became nearly worthless. Blake lost operational control. 112 days after the launch, federal prosecutors filed charges for false statements in a federal contracting matter and wire fraud tied to lender disclosures. The receiver's final accounting placed recall, testing, and contract remediation costs at $1,742,000. The lake property sold 136 days after the launch for $1,320,000, and every dollar was applied to the matured credit facility. Mason cooperated after Lena's recording was authenticated. Lorraine resigned. Vanessa gave birth to a healthy boy and entered a separate dispute with Blake over support. The child was not punished for the adults who had planned around him. 9 months later, Trace 8 Labs reopened as a small validation and training center. No stage, no ribbon cutting, no wall covered with photographs of me shaking hands. We trained veterans, quality technicians, and young manufacturing workers to trace a product backward before someone had to trace an injury forward. Lena joined the first apprenticeship class. On her 3rd week, she found a seal inconsistency in a training sample. She drew a blue triangle on the reject tag and brought it to me without apologizing. The old compression bandage hung in a clear frame near the lab entrance. The card beneath it did not mention my rank, my company, or the deployment where I found it. It read, "A label tells you what someone promised. A process tells you whether they kept it. If someone you know is still carrying a family, a marriage, or a workplace on the strength of their silence, share this story with them. Not so they can chase revenge, so they remember that evidence can protect the truth, boundaries can protect the innocent, and dignity does not require permission." Late that afternoon, the air shower opened behind us. 3 descending chimes moved through the quiet lab. For years, that sound had meant there was another emergency waiting for me to correct. This time, no one was hiding a shipment, no one was moving my signature. Lena checked the sample again, confirmed the rejection, and entered her own name into the record. I watched her press submit, then I let the process hold without me.